Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Around that time, Shu Baosai and some other outer sect disciples were in the middle of their journeyman apothecary promotion test. Elder Shu was off to the side, a somber look on his face as he presided over the occasion. Suddenly, a flock of pigeons appeared, and plopping sounds began to echo out as endless amounts of bird excrement showered down. It was like rain, covering Shu Baosai, the other test takers, and the audience. Even Elder Shu's hair was peppered with excrement. Everyone looked up in shock as the flock of pigeons flew off into the distance, excrement showering down below them. Those pigeons. I've never seen them before. Damn it, what's going on? I can't believe they're crapping non-stop. The disciples were in an uproar, and Elder Shu stood there blankly for a moment before his face began to twitch. Chen Zhang and Zhao Yiduo stood on a mountain path, glowering at each other. The two of them had been at odds since they were servants, and their conflict was only growing more intense. Usually they just glared at each other, but now things were getting more serious. Today, we're finally going to resolve our... However, before the words could be spoken completely, a group of legged fish ran by, kicking up a cloud of dust as they did. Before Chen Zhang and Zhao Yiduo could react, a group of cats approached at top speed, emitting thunderous burps as they ran after the fish. Chen Zhang and Zhao Yiduo gasped in shock, their hostilities completely forgotten. Did we just see a bunch of legged fish? Zhao Yiduo blurted, wondering if he was seeing things. Those cats' burps were as loud as thunder. Chen Zhang said, eyes wide. Further down the mountain, cries of alarm rose up from numerous outer sect disciples as a horde of red-eyed rabbits began to nibble at their legs. Although the rabbits were relatively easy to grab, the chattering sounds of their biting teeth were fear-inspiring. Most shocking of all was one particular rabbit which sat on the back of an elephant-sized chicken. Eee, you can talk? Ha ha ha, this medicinal pill is incredible. I, Bai Xiaochun, am clearly super awesome. This rabbit can actually talk. Everyone on Fragrant Cloud Peak was going crazy. Countless people heard the words spoken by the rabbit, and quickly realized that the instigator of the entire affair was none other than Bai Xiaochun. In the inner sect district, a group of toads hopped along. Any inner sect disciple who caught sight of them would gasp in shock. The sight of such eye-covered toads was enough to terrify anyone. There was even a 9-headed tiger running amok. Fragrant Cloud Peak was thrown into complete chaos. And there was one particular monkey, which had climbed all the way up to the roof of Li Qinghao's residence. There it sat, on the highest point of Fragrant Cloud Peak, chin rested in its palm, looking on thoughtfully as Shu Meixiang made her way off into the distance, having just finished chatting with Li Qinghao. Li Qinghao's face was ashen as he stood there outside his residence, looking up at the monkey. He was just about to start yelling when, all of a sudden, plopping sounds could be heard, and a rain of bird excrement descended. Li Qinghao's jaw dropped. It had been quite some time since there had been a commotion on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Outer and inner sect disciples alike were all in an uproar. For the most part, the animals didn't really affect them. However, no one could figure out how such tiny pigeons could unleash such a torrent of bird excrement. Gradually, the rabbit, which originally could only recite 3 passages, learned to speak some more. Gradually, it also learned how to cry out at the top of its lungs. Heavens, what's that? Did you see that? That rabbit can talk. This is definitely the handiwork of Bai Xiaochun. Keep this on the down low, but yesterday I saw Elder Zhou go into a room with those phoenixes of his. Afterward, I heard some really strange noises. Elder Sister Zhou Xinqi, Elder Sister Du Lingfei, I don't care if Bai Xiaochun tries to stop me, the two of you will definitely end up with me, Shu Baosai. Elder Brother Hu Yunfei, you're so naughty. What are you doing? What's that? Why are those monkeys twitching like that? Junior Sister Meixiang, I, Li Qinghao, am not fickle in love. After I break through into the gold core stage, I'll definitely take you as my Taoist partner. Ha ha ha, this medicinal pill is incredible. I, Bai Xiaochun, am clearly super awesome. This rabbit can actually talk. As the rabbit ran to and fro, its repertoire of passages grew. It had very sensitive ears, and would repeat anything it heard. Many people were affected, much to their chagrin. The sharp-eared rabbit soon began to spread what had been well-kept secrets, even naming names. Some of the stories the rabbit spread were almost impossible to believe. That was especially true of the one about Li Qinghao. It was something the likes of which had never been talked about publicly, and many people were left completely shocked, even many elders. Xu Baosai was stunned, Hu Yunfei's eyes went wide, and Li Qinghao began to tremble in rage. Right about then, Bai Xiaochun was returning from the market, numerous small animals in tow, brimming with anticipation regarding his next set of experiments. However, as soon as he stepped onto fragrant cloud peak, bird excrement rained down. Jumping to the side, he looked up with a frown to see a flock of pigeons flying by. Eee, why do they look so familiar? Suddenly, a rustling sound could be heard from the nearby bushes, and a school of legged fish burst out. Bai Xiaochun's jaw dropped as he watched a bunch of burping cats fly out after the fish. Moments later, his eyes went wide as a troop of twitching monkeys ran by, frothing at the mouth as they sped along. Bai Xiaochun began to tremble, and all the hair on his body stood on end. This is impossible. He quickly pulled out the golden crow sword and flew up into the air. Wings sprouted out behind him as he shot up the mountain at top speed. As he flew along, he saw animals everywhere. He also got quite a few odd stares from the people he passed. By the time he reached his immortals cave, his heart was pounding. Then he saw that the door was open, and the cave was completely empty except for the geese standing guard. How did they get out? He thought, standing there in a daze. It didn't seem possible. Suddenly, he looked to the side to see a rabbit running along, spewing a whole bunch of words that ended with "Ha ha ha, this medicinal pill is incredible. I, Bai Xiaochun, am clearly super awesome. This rabbit can actually talk." Bai Xiaochun's eyes went wide, and at the same time, the rabbit caught sight of him, and its eyes went wide too. It immediately turned tail and fled. Well aware that a disaster was underway, Bai Xiaochun lunged at the rabbit. Unfortunately, the rabbit's speed was explosive, and in the blink of an eye, not even its shadow could be seen. Bai Xiaochun's jaw dropped. And that was when he heard the roaring voice of Li Qinghao. "Bai Xiaochun, get this mess cleaned up immediately. If I see one animal or one speck of bird crap, you're going directly to 10,000 Snakes Valley. And make that damned rabbit shut up." It didn't matter that Bai Xiaochun had taken first place in the chosen battles, or that he had made such incredible progress with his undying silver skin. As soon as he heard 10,000 Snakes Valley, he shivered. The mere thought of the place filled him with fear. Looking like he was about to cry, he subconsciously glanced further up the mountain, whereupon his eyes went wide. Sitting there on the roof of Li Qinghao's residence was a monkey, its chin resting on its palm, apparently lost in thought. On the verge of tears, Bai Xiaochun raced up the mountain toward the monkey. As he closed in, the monkey looked over, a seemingly emotional look in its eyes, as if it were thinking about how wonderful it had been to enjoy freedom. Although Bai Xiaochun was a bit shocked, he quickly grabbed the monkey and threw it into his bag of holding. With that, he raced off nervously to scour the rest of fragrant Cloud Peak. Wherever he went, the disciples looked at him with strange expressions. The next beast he caught was the 9-headed tiger, and after that, the eye-covered toads. Soon he had the elephant-sized chickens, and then the legged fish. Not long after that, the burping cats were in custody. The ducks were the easiest of all to apprehend. It was nearing the end of the day by the time he rounded up the twitching monkeys and threw them into his bag of holding. The hardest to catch were the defecating pigeons, which took a lot of effort. By the time he caught the last one, it was late at night. After taking stock, he realized that the only animal left was the talking rabbit. Unfortunately, despite much searching, Bai Xiaochun couldn't find it. The rabbit was an expert at hiding. Sighing, he looked at the bird excrement covering fragrant Cloud Peak and got to work cleaning it up. It took the whole night. By the time he returned to his immortals cave, exhausted, it was dawn. As the sun rose, the disciples of fragrant Cloud Peak emerged to find the mountain peak squeaky clean. When they thought back to the events of the previous day, they suddenly had a much deeper understanding of Bai Xiaochun's medicinal pills. Of course, those disciples who had been showered with bird excrement were furious about the matter, but there was little they could do. After all, they knew Bai Xiaochun hadn't done any of it on purpose. Even still, the hijinks he caused were happening over and over again. As such, terror regarding Bai Xiaochun was growing in the hearts of all. Bai Xiaochun slept until afternoon. Upon waking up, he decided that he didn't dare perform any more strange pill experiments. Leaving the sect, he went far out into the wilderness, where he found a safe place to release all of the animals from his bag of holding. "You're all free now," he said with a bitter smile. The animals who hadn't eaten any of his medicinal pills quickly scurried away. However, the other animals simply stood there looking at Bai Xiaochun. He looked back at them for a moment before producing some more medicinal pills from his bag of holding. "If you eat some of these pills, maybe you can start building up your own cultivation. Be good, alright? You really caused me a lot of trouble yesterday." He gave a medicinal pill to each animal, then waved and turned to leave. It was at that point that Nine-Headed Tiger let out a powerful roar. Bai Xiaochun looked over his shoulder to find the Nine-Headed Tiger looking at him with a strange gleam in its eyes, as if it were committing his features to memory. With that, it turned and sped off into the distance. All the other animals had similar reactions as the tiger, including the ducks, the pigeons, the walking fish, the burping cats, the guardian geese, the eye-covered toads, and the twitching monkeys. With a final look at Bai Xiaochun, they scattered. The last to leave was the thoughtful monkey, which looked at Bai Xiaochun with what seemed to be a gleam of intelligence. For some reason, Bai Xiaochun felt that there was something profound about that monkey. After giving Bai Xiaochun a very deep look, it turned and headed off into the distance. Bai Xiaochun was left gaping. For some reason, he'd gotten the feeling that the monkey was just as intelligent as a human. The profound look in its eyes had been clear. Thoughtfully pulling out a jade slip, he found the information about the pill he'd fed to that monkey. "There's something about that pill that I don't understand." He looked thoughtfully at the departing animals, wishing them well. Their lives had changed because of him, and he truly hoped that they would be happy. Eventually, wings sprouted from Bai Xiaochun's back, and he shot back toward the sect. After returning to Fragrant Cloud Peak, Bai Xiaochun started getting a bit emotional. He still had a lot of mystery pills in his bag of holding, but he didn't dare to test any of them out. When he walked along the mountain paths of the sect, the other disciples would either give him odd looks, or stare at him with hatred and anger. "Why is it so hard to pursue my dreams?" he thought. "It's not like it's my fault. Uncle Li is the one who told me to focus on my research." Sighing, he walked along until he reached his immortals cave, where he sat staring off into space. Earlier that year, Bai Xiaochun had frequently gone to Li Qinghao to ask questions about problems that popped up in his medicine concocting. Li Qinghao was often surprised by the questions. The depths to which Bai Xiaochun was delving in the Tao of medicine were unusual for ordinary apothecaries. When combined with Bai Xiaochun's incredible achievements with the stone stels, Li Qinghao couldn't help but be filled with anticipation. However, every person had a different understanding of the Tao of medicine, so Li Qinghao wouldn't answer any of Bai Xiaochun's questions. Instead, he encouraged him to do his own tests. Only by doing so would he be able to develop a Tao of medicine that was his own. If he simply followed along with the crowd, he would never be able to make a name for himself as a Grand Master of the Tao of medicine. Besides, the origins of most pill formulas were the results of generations upon generations of experimentation. "No, my dreams haven't changed. What Uncle Li said was right. The only things which truly belong to you are the things you get on your own. Even if it gets harder, I still won't give up." Gritting his teeth, he decided that even if he couldn't test out the mystery pills he'd made, he could still stay devoted to the Tao of medicine. "I'm definitely going to become an amazing master apothecary." Taking a deep breath, he headed back to his medicine concocting workstation, where he devoted himself completely to pill concocting. Time passed. In the blink of an eye, several months had gone by. Bai Xiaochun was getting a lot more confident and skilled when it came to Tier 3 spirit medicine. He solved one problem after another, and soon found that Tier 3 spirit medicine weren't really that difficult after all. However, an even bigger problem was looming. Despite his best efforts, and despite the fact that he was getting much more proficient with Tier 3 spirit medicines, it was very difficult to raise his success rate. Generally speaking, out of 10 batches of pills, 5 would succeed. Of the other 5, 1 would produce an unidentifiable mystery pill, and 4 would be so impure as to be considered toxic. He was starting to go a bit crazy. Even spirit enhancement did nothing to the toxic pills. Only low-grade pills could be raised to a higher level by spirit enhancement. Although he wasn't aware of it, his focus on medicine concocting had reached an obsessive-compulsive level. Unless he could reach the perfection he sought, he would feel uneasy. Impurities. How am I supposed to get rid of those impurities? His eyes were completely bloodshot as he stared down at his large collection of toxic pills. After some more thought, he considered going to ask Li Qinghao. But when he thought about how Li Qinghao had encouraged him to do his own observation and experimentation, he gritted his teeth and devoted himself even more madly to solving the problem. Days went by. Eventually, people began to take note that Bai Xiaochun had grown quiet again. There were no explosions and no animals running around. Everything was calm, although for some people, the newfound quiet was difficult to get used to. Unfortunately, good things never last forever. A month later, in the middle of the night, Bai Xiaochun sat in front of his pill furnace, hair disheveled, madly performing incantation gestures to control the earth flame. As he fed more medicinal plants into the furnace, his eyes grew more and more bloodshot. This is it. Almost done. I'm definitely going to solve all the problems this time. This is what I call creativity. I added thunder god vine, lightning rod flower, wither tree rose and yin yang thistle, and invented a new technique. This is definitely going to be able to cleanse the impurities. It's definitely going to work. This is Bai Xiaochun's one and only lightning detox grand magic. As his excitement built, the pill furnace began to tremble, and a medicinal aroma wafted out. Outside, the moon hung high in the cloudless night sky above fragrant cloud peak. Suddenly, a cloud layer formed, and a bolt of lightning descended toward fragrant cloud peak. When it slammed into Bai Xiaochun's cave, the cave's spell formation trembled, and some of the lightning even pierced the spell formation in the stone of his immortal's cave to land on the pill furnace. Lightning crackled inside the immortal's cave, accompanied by Bai Xiaochun's wild laughter. After the lightning faded away, he rushed excitedly over to the pill furnace. Unfortunately, the only thing that remained inside was some soot and a bit of swirling smoke. Too much lightning rod flower, he thought, tugging at his disheveled hair and looking every bit the mad scientist. With that, he produced more medicinal plants and began to prepare the ingredients. Quite a few fragrant Cloud Peak disciples had seen the lightning, and had noticed that it appeared to have fallen on Bai Xiaochun's immortal's cave. So, even God is getting tired of Bai Xiaochun? That must be it. The heavens do have eyes. Lightning is being sent to put an end to him. People had various ideas about what was happening, with many people rejoicing in Bai Xiaochun's apparent misfortune. Some of the elders even noticed the lightning, and were quite surprised. Not even Peak Lord Li attracts thunder and lightning when concocting medicine. According to the legends, only Tier 7 spirit medicines and higher provoke tribulation lightning. Just what is Bai Xiaochun doing? 3 days later in the afternoon, laughter rang out from within Bai Xiaochun's cave. Staring at the pill furnace, his hands flashed in a double-handed incantation gesture. Spiritual power erupted, and earth flame raged. With a roar, Bai Xiaochun slapped both hands down onto the surface of the pill furnace. Lightning detox grand magic. As the pill furnace rumbled, clouds gathered above the summit of fragrant Cloud Peak, and a single bolt of lightning shot down toward Bai Xiaochun's cave. This time, large numbers of disciples saw the shocking sight. Deafening thunder boomed as the lightning bolt slammed into his immortal's cave. Inside, Bai Xiaochun excitedly inspected the pill furnace, only to find that it contained no pill, only some medicinal dregs and a bit of smoke. After taking a whiff, his head spun and his vision swam. Taking a few steps back, he even realized that a bit of froth had seeped out of the edges of his mouth. Too much thunder god vine, he murmured. With that, he flopped down unconscious. 3 days later he woke up, cleaned his face, and consumed a few medicinal pills. After clearing his head, he went back to concocting. In the following days, more and more thunder boomed over fragrant Cloud Peak. As the disciples witnessed lightning striking Bai Xiaochun's immortal's cave with such frequency, they were struck speechless. Even the elders were shocked. They began to suspect that Bai Xiaochun really would be struck dead eventually. Despite the fact that Bai Xiaochun feared death so much, he was so bedeviled by his desire to concoct medicine that he completely forgot about the concept of death. He was fully immersed in the Tao of medicine, constantly adjusting the medicine formula he was working with, continually trying to perfect his lightning detox grand magic. Lightning detox grand magic. Boom. Damn it, lightning detox grand magic. Boom. By this point, the cave's defensive spell formations had been rendered entirely useless, and anyone within earshot could hear Bai Xiaochun yelling at the top of his lungs. Gradually, word spread that the thunder and lightning had come because Bai Xiaochun was working on a method to detoxify spirit medicines. This piqued the attention of quite a few sect elders, and they began to observe even more closely. Although the lightning continued to fall, strangely, nobody did anything to interfere. Even Li Qinghao approved of Bai Xiaochun's attempt at creativity and would occasionally observe. Unfortunately, good things never last forever. Even after 100 attempts, Bai Xiaochun still couldn't find the perfect ingredient ratio. He even began to add other medicinal plants, hoping that some of them would have an effect. One evening, Bai Xiaochun let out a roar, and lightning danced in the sky above. This time, it wasn't a single bolt that fell down, it was 10. Strangely, only one lightning bolt struck Bai Xiaochun's area. The rest happened to fall in other locations on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Boom. Considering how many bolts of lightning fell, it was no surprise that miserable shrieks could be heard all over the mountain. Fragrant Cloud Peak was once again thrown into a commotion. Zhou Xingqi's Immortals Cave was struck, but thankfully the spell formation shielded it from damage. Zhou Xingqi glared angrily over in the direction of Bai Xiaochun's Immortals Cave, barely able to hold back from cursing him aloud. Li Qinghao and the Fragrant Cloud Peak elders placated the disciples. After all, they couldn't help but approve of Bai Xiaochun's devotion to the Tao of medicine. However, Bai Xiaochun had truly gone mad. 2 hours later, clouds filled the sky, and this time, nearly 100 lightning bolts descended onto Fragrant Cloud Peak. Booms rang out in all directions, and even more disciples looked up into the sky, shocked to the core. People ran back into their residences, unwilling to even set foot outside. Li Qinghao and the elders were struck speechless. The sight of nearly 100 lightning bolts crashing down into various areas of Fragrant Cloud Peak was completely shocking. Perhaps because Zhou Xingqi's Immortals Cave was so close to Bai Xiaochun's, it ended up being struck by about 6 or 7 of them. Her entire Immortals Cave shook violently, and the spell formation shield distorted visibly. Things weren't over, though. After enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, everyone was thrown into a commotion again as more clouds appeared in the sky. This time, hundreds of lightning bolts could be seen forming. When they slammed down onto Fragrant Cloud Peak, all of the Immortals Caves trembled, and many other areas were badly damaged. Bai Xiaochun's cave was almost destroyed. Even more shocking, Zhou Xingqi's cave attracted over 50 bolts of lightning. They slammed into the cave over and over again like heavenly tribulation, breaking open the cave itself until Zhou Xingqi tumbled out. Her face pale, she fled off into the distance. Looking back at the flattened rubble that had been her Immortals Cave, she screamed, "Bai Xiaochun." There were a few other inner sect disciples who met similar fates. Their Immortals Caves destroyed, they stormed over toward Bai Xiaochun's Immortals Cave, vowing to settle accounts immediately, no matter what happened. However, in that same moment, clouds roiled up above, even thicker than before, and an intense pressure weighed down on everything below. Zhou Xingqi's heart began to pound, and her face fell. The disciples who had come to pick a fight with Bai Xiaochun gasped and began to shake visibly. Even the peak lords of Violet Cauldron Peak and Green Crest Peak noticed the clouds, and their eyes went wide. Sect leader Zhang Yuandong saw it from afar, and his scalp began to tingle. Shockingly, over 1,000 lightning bolts could be seen within the clouds. That will destroy Fragrant Cloud Peak. Bai Xiaochun. Heavens, what is he doing over there? I can't believe there are so many lightning bolts. We're under attack. Countless cries of shock and alarm rose up in and around Fragrant Cloud Peak. Everyone from outer to inner sect disciples were trembling as an intense fear filled them. Bai Xiaochun had tuned everything out, and didn't even realize what was happening. Eyes crimson, he stared at the pill furnace for a moment, then bellowed and slapped it with both hands. Lightning detox grand magic. Boom. Even Li Qinghao gasped in response to what was happening. Having no time to actually dispel the lightning, he quickly performed an incantation gesture and waved his finger toward the sky. In response, a resplendent, multicolored shield sprang into existence above Fragrant Cloud Peak. At the same time, the more than 1,000 lightning bolts began to descend from the clouds. Their target was Fragrant Cloud Peak, but the shield blocked their progress. Massive rumbling sounds echoed out, and ripples spread out across the shield as it began to neutralize the lightning bolts. After 30 breaths of time, the final lightning bolt was neutralized, and the multicolored shield faded away. The disciples of Fragrant Cloud Peak were left trembling, the intense feeling of danger still lingering in their hearts. After a moment, they turned with bloodshot eyes to look in the direction of Bai Xiaochun's cave. Bai Xiaochun, countless disciples howled. It was hard to say who made the first move, but soon, a huge mob was rushing toward his immortals' cave. Elders joined the crowd, and even Li Qinghao flew in the same direction in a bright beam of light. Within his crumbling immortals' cave, Bai Xiaochun was staring anxiously at the pill furnace, surprised that no lightning had come. Distracted, he suddenly realized that a deafening rumble could be heard outside, a sound which far exceeded the thunder from earlier. Face draining of blood, he leapt to his feet, which was when he realized that the immortals' cave was on the verge of collapsing. Without another moment of hesitation, he ran outside. Moments later, the rumbling caused by countless running people pushed the immortals' cave past the point where it could hold together, and it collapsed. Bai Xiaochun gaped mutely as the dust billowed out in all directions. That was when he realized that he was surrounded by a sea of furious fragrant Cloud Peak disciples. Before he could begin his explanation, Zhou Xingqi's shrill cry pierced through the crowd. Bai Xiaochun, you owe me an immortal's cave. Take Bai Xiaochun down. Damn it, you destroyed my immortal's cave. This is over the top. You weren't really concocting medicine, were you? First were the exploding pill furnaces, then all those weird animals, and finally this lightning. Why you? The crowd was completely enraged after having been tormented for 2 years in a row by Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun felt more wronged than ever, considering that he really had been concocting pills. But then he noticed that Zhou Xingqi's immortal's cave had been reduced to rubble, and suddenly felt an apologetic twinge in his heart. Hu Xiaomei and Hu Yunfei were there in the crowd, but even they looked a bit helpless. Hu Xiaomei looked over at Bai Xiaochun, gritted her teeth, and was just about to start defending him to the crowd when Hu Yunfei fearfully clamped his hand over her mouth. It was a delicate moment, given how incensed the crowd was. The disciples of Fragrant Cloud Peak had all determined that letting Bai Xiaochun continue to concoct pills was unacceptable. As long as he was working at pill concocting, none of them would feel safe. When they thought about what had just occurred with the lightning, their shouts of fury grew even more intense. Even as the crowd teetered on the verge of losing control, the elders arrived, along with Li Qinghao. The disciples instantly quieted down, looking over woefully at Li Qinghao, clearly imploring him to take action. Li Qinghao felt a huge headache coming on as he glared at Bai Xiaochun. Inciting lightning wasn't something that was incredibly difficult to do. Lightning was a yang element, so the only thing one had to do was provoke the proper transformations in plants and vegetation to create a yang aura, and thus attract lightning. However, even Li Qinghao was shocked by the sheer amount of lightning that had descended. Furthermore, Li Qinghao was also fairly certain that the exaggerated nature of the event had something to do with Fragrant Cloud Peak itself, which fundamentally possessed a yin aura. Of course, the ordinary disciples wouldn't know that, and thus wouldn't know that Bai Xiaochun had only been one instigating factor. Bai Xiaochun truly felt sorry for everyone, but also felt that he was getting the short end of the stick. Lacking any other options, he simply looked anxiously at Li Qinghao. With a slight shake of his head, Li Qinghao said, Bai Xiaochun, from here on out, you're not allowed to concoct medicine on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Leave the mountain to do any concocting. The disciples started to get excited at Li Qinghao's brilliance. Yeah, leave the mountain to do your concocting. Stay away from Fragrant Cloud Peak. He's not concocting medicine, he's trying to kill us. That's right, if you keep concocting medicine the way you have been, you're going to destroy Fragrant Cloud Peak. There's nothing strange about being asked to leave. But Before Bai Xiaochun could even begin to explain, Li Qinghao waved his sleeve. The matter's been decided. All right, everyone, take your leave. Having finished speaking, Li Qinghao glared harshly at Bai Xiaochun, who immediately bit his tongue. He almost looked like he was going to cry. He truly felt horrible for disappointing Li Qinghao so badly. The disciples in the crowd gave their final glares to Bai Xiaochun and then gradually dispersed. After everyone was gone, Li Qinghao stood there with Bai Xiaochun and let out a long sigh. Okay, explain your lightning detox grand magic to me. Bai Xiaochun looked up, eyes glittering, he smiled broadly, and began to explain all of the details of his grand magic. Upon finishing, he stood there looking at Li Qinghao in anticipation. Li Qinghao thought for a moment, and then nodded his head. The Tao of medicine is boundless, and no one could ever dare to say that it has a limit. Anything can happen during the journey upon that long path. The method you attempted has been tried and tested by others in the past, and they all failed. Lightning is powerful and very difficult to control. Although some degree of success is possible, you can only go so far. You should wait until your cultivation base is a bit higher before trying again. At the very least, foundation establishment. Right now, any more attempts would be useless. Seeing how obsessed Bai Xiaochun was with the Tao of medicine, he did his best to explain things gently. After finishing, he patted Bai Xiaochun encouragingly on the shoulder, then turned to leave. Bai Xiaochun sighed and sat down blankly. He really felt bad for causing so many immortals' caves to be destroyed. After thinking about what Li Qinghao had told him, he decided that, for the moment, he would stop working on the lightning detox grand magic. I need to take my research in a different direction, he thought. I need to find another way to cleanse the impurities, something that doesn't use lightning, and that doesn't affect other people. But how do I do that? After some more thought, he looked toward Violet Cauldron Peak, and his eyes began to shine. Night hadn't fallen yet, so Bai Xiaochun straightened up a bit, then looked back at his destroyed immortal's cave, his eyes shining with determination. For the Tao of medicine, and for my eternal life pill. With that, he walked down Fragrant Cloud Peak and headed toward Violet Cauldron Peak. Bai Xiaochun was already very familiar with Violet Cauldron Peak. Back in the day, he and Big Fatty Zhang had covered nearly half the mountain in their search for spirit tail chickens. Later on, when he became so entranced with being called Sect Uncle, he had come to stroll around the mountain on numerous occasions. Setting foot on Violet Cauldron Peak, he suddenly felt very calm. The disciples here weren't as irritable as those on Fragrant Cloud Peak, and in fact, many of them called out to him in greeting. Bai Xiaochun quickly began to sigh happily. All smiles, he walked along the familiar path toward Big Fatty Zhang's residence. Big Fatty Zhang still hadn't reached the inner sect yet, so he still lived in the same place as before. It was evening by the time Bai Xiaochun reached the front gate. When Big Fatty Zhang saw that it was Bai Xiaochun, he immediately broke into a wide smile. Once they were both inside his courtyard, Big Fatty Zhang proudly showed off his amazing spirit enhancement abilities, and explained that he was now renowned as a miraculous spirit enhancer here on Violet Cauldron Peak. Bai Xiaochun immediately offered words of congratulations, which of course made Big Fatty Zhang even happier than before. Finally, Bai Xiaochun cleared his throat. Eldest brother, there's something I wanted to discuss with you. Say the word, Big Fatty Zhang said, waving his hand in grandiose fashion. Could you help me find a place to stay on Violet Cauldron Peak? I want to do some medicine concocting here. With that, he looked pleadingly at Big Fatty Zhang. Concoct medicine? You're already an inner sect disciple. Your immortal's cave should have a medicine concocting workstation. Oh, by the way, I was in secluded meditation for a while. I heard Fragrant Cloud Peak had an incident with some lightning. What happened exactly? Having been out of the public eye for most of the year so far, Big Fatty Zhang wasn't too familiar with events beyond the borders of Violet Cauldron Peak. After all, Fragrant Cloud Peak was a different mountain altogether, so naturally he wouldn't know as much. Bai Xiaochun frowned bleakly. I was a bit careless in my pill concocting and attracted some lightning. My immortal's cave was actually destroyed. Huh? Big Fatty Zhang said, his eyes going wide. Listen, eldest brother, you don't have to worry, Bai Xiaochun said, slapping his chest proudly. I hereby swear that if I concoct medicine on Violet Cauldron Peak, I won't attract any lightning. Seriously, I'm the kind of person who keeps my word. Besides, I can concoct Tier 3 spirit medicine now. I'll give you a whole bottle when I'm finished. When Big Fatty Zhang heard Bai Xiaochun talk about Tier 3 spirit medicine, his heart began to thump. Tier 3 spirit medicines were available in the local market, but their prices were astronomical. Considering what Bai Xiaochun was offering him, there was no way he would refuse. Coupled with his pledge, Big Fatty Zhang only had to think for a moment before laughing heartily. No problem at all. I don't have anywhere to concoct pills here, but I'm friends with the elder brother who manages the Immortals' caves. If we grease the wheels a bit, he can secretly get you into an inner sect disciple's cave. Of course, it can't be a long-term thing. Not long-term, Bai Xiaochun said, eyes shining with excitement. Not long at all, half a year at the most. Big Fatty Zhang nodded. Leaving Bai Xiaochun behind, he went away for the time it takes an incense stick to burn, then returned proudly with a command medallion. Done, he announced. It's not a very good immortal's cave, but it has a medicine concocting workstation. It's pretty close, I'll walk you over. Bai Xiaochun let out a cheer, then flattered Big Fatty Zhang a bit more. Bursting with happiness, Big Fatty Zhang led Bai Xiaochun off to the Immortals' cave. It was relatively simple and crude for an Immortals' cave, and very small, nothing like his cave back on Fragrant Cloud Peak. However, it had a medicine concocting workstation, which was enough for Bai Xiaochun. Sitting there looking very satisfied, he took a deep breath and said, "Eldest brother truly is a loyal friend." Moved, he reiterated to himself that he must not attempt any experiments with the lightning detox grand magic. Nor could he test mystery pills on animals. As far as exploding pill furnaces, he was sure he could avoid that. Considering all that, he was convinced that no problems would arise because of his medicine concocting. It's time to research more ways to cleanse impurities. Calming himself, he produced a handful of spirit plants, which he began to analyze in detail. Slowly, he immersed himself in the Tao of medicine. During his first month on Violet Cauldron Peak, Bai Xiaochun worked quietly in the Immortals' cave. None of the disciples around him even noticed that he was there. Big Fatty Zhang started to relax. At first, he had come to visit Bai Xiaochun fairly frequently to watch him at his concocting work, but eventually stopped visiting so often. But then, another month passed. Bai Xiaochun's eyes glittered as he looked at the medicinal pills in front of him. After some detailed examination, he began to laugh loudly. During that month of work, he had made 4 major efforts to try to come up with a new method for cleansing impurities, and now, he had finally found his new direction. Using lightning to purge the pills with outside force is one method. But another method is to purge the spirit medicine from the inside. Bai Xiaochun, you really are a genius. Ha ha ha, I know exactly what to do. By using the principles of mutual augmentation and suppression, I can create a burning power even as I concoct the pills, something that will expunge the impurities. After the impurities are forced out, the final medicinal pill will no longer be toxic. Getting more excited, he took a deep breath and got to work. After organizing all of the medicinal plant and then beginning to feed them into the pill furnace, he started adding even more plants that weren't part of the pill formula, keeping careful records about everything he did. 4 days later, he once again slipped into a state of bedeviled focus. Circling continuously around the pill furnace, he made occasional adjustments to the earth flame, sometimes adding in other spirit medicines, following his instincts to either dilute or strengthen the mixture. As night fell, Bai Xiaochun's excitement grew as popping sounds began to ring out from the pill furnace. Soon, the furnace began to shake, and then a noxious black smoke billowed out. Bai Xiaochun quickly waved his sleeve to blow the smoke outside of the Immortals' cave, where it floated up into the air. Some of it ended up being absorbed by the clouds above Violet Cauldron Peak, and some was carried by the wind in the direction of Green Crest Peak. After the Immortals' cave was cleared of smoke, Bai Xiaochun hurried over to the pill furnace and peered inside. It contained a single medicinal pill which he picked up and examined. It was clearly a toxic pill, however, whereas the previous version had been 100% impure, this one was only about 98 or 99% impure. He was quite pleased, and was now sure that he was on the right track. All he had to do was keep working toward a method to find the perfect combination of elements. Ha ha ha, this concocting method is much more low profile. No lightning, no thunder, I'm not affecting anyone else at all. He was very happy. After all, he really didn't want to arouse the anger of the other disciples because of his concocting work. Feeling very satisfied, he sat down cross-legged to meditate for a while. After finishing his daily work with the Dragon Mammoth Sea-forming scripture, the Undying Live Forever technique, and the Water Swamp Kingdom, he headed over to the pill furnace to begin concocting again. He devoted himself completely to his work. Every day, he would concoct 4 or 5 batches, and each time, black smoke would billow out, which he would subsequently blow out of the Immortals' cave, where it rose up into the sky. 10 days later, he was delighted to discover that while out of every 10 batches, 4 were toxic pills, the levels of impurity were steadily dropping. Lately, they had dipped to about 97%. It was clearly a reduction from the previous level of 100%. That wasn't the only progress he had made either. The pills that came out successfully also had fewer impurities. If he continued on down this path, he would be able to consistently produce mid-grade Tier 3 spirit medicine. Eyes burning with passion, he completely tuned out the outside world and went crazy with concocting medicine. It was almost like being in secluded meditation. He kept careful records, and constantly made adjustments as required. Soon, he increased his productivity to the point where he was producing 7 or 8 batches per day. Black smoke was rising up into the sky almost constantly. Half a month later, he was delighted to find that the impurity levels in the toxic pills had dropped to 95%. By the time Bai Xiaochun had been on Violet Cauldron Peak for 2 months, many disciples on Fragrant Cloud Peak were beginning to breathe sighs of relief. They weren't sure where exactly Bai Xiaochun had gone off to, but they could sense that peace had been restored. Other than Big Fatty Zhang, no one else on Violet Cauldron Peak knew that Bai Xiaochun had come there to concoct medicine. However, word had been spreading about all the things that had occurred on Fragrant Cloud Peak because of him. As Big Fatty Zhang heard more of the stories, he began to tremble. He could never have imagined that Bai Xiaochun could cause such a huge stir on Fragrant Cloud Peak. Although he was a bit nervous, Bai Xiaochun had been very quiet and hadn't drawn any attention at all. Gradually, Big Fatty Zhang began to relax again. Time passed. By this point, Bai Xiaochun had been at his concocting work for 3 months straight. Black smoke poured continuously out of the Immortals cave, to the point where it was finally starting to attract some attention from nearby Violet Cauldron Peak disciples. However, none of them gave it much thought. Big Fatty Zhang was calmer than ever. However, he had noticed something annoying lately, which was that it had started raining on Violet Cauldron Peak. It was a very strange rain, considering that it only fell on Violet Cauldron Peak, and nowhere else. Furthermore, the rain was dirty. If it fell on you, it would leave dark streaks behind. Gradually, other disciples on Violet Cauldron Peak started to notice, and people began wondering what exactly was going on. As for Bai Xiaochun, he was madly focused on pill concocting. By this point, he was up to about 15 batches per day. He almost never took breaks, and was starting to look a bit sallow and thin. As for the toxic pills, their impurity levels continued to drop. They were now at about 92 to 93%. Only a few more months, and I'll be able to get the toxicity levels below 90%. Then they'll count as low-grade spirit medicines. With a whoop of excitement, Bai Xiaochun immersed himself even further in concocting. Meanwhile, the sound of an uproar was building outside. Big Fatty Zhang was walking along on one of the paths that wound through Violet Cauldron Peak when suddenly, the rain began to fall even harder than before. At the same time, an acrid odor began to fill the air. Then, Big Fatty Zhang's eyes went wide as he realized that the rain splashing down onto him actually hurt. Furthermore, his clothing was beginning to melt. Big Fatty Zhang gaped in shock, then let out a cry of alarm when he realized that it would only be moments before his clothes were completely melted. He immediately dashed back in the direction of his residence. Along the way, more cries of alarm rang out. As he ran along, Big Fatty Zhang saw other Violet Cauldron Peak disciples speeding along, their clothing in ruins. The more the rainwater soaked them, the more the fabric melted. There were even a few unlucky disciples who were already completely naked. Heavens! What's happening? My clothes. What kind of rain is this? It stinks, and even hurts. It's actually melting my clothes. Damn it, even magical shields can't stop it. Violet Cauldron Peak was in a complete uproar. Anyone who didn't get out of the rain immediately would quickly find their clothing melting off of their bodies. Violet Cauldron Peak was devolving into chaos. Even some of the longtime inner sect disciples were going crazy. In all of their lives, they had never experienced anything like this. The screams of the female disciples were especially piercing. The elders of Violet Cauldron Peak stared in shock. There were even some elders who were outside lecturing about magical techniques. When the rain fell on them, they trembled. At the same time, many people looked over at Bai Xiaochun's Immortals cave, from which masses of black smoke billowed. As it rose up into the sky, the noxious black rain fell harder. There was one particular inner sect disciple who did his best to cover up his clothing. Alarmed, he flew along until he happened to run directly into a cloud of black smoke. Instantly, his clothing was gone. Letting out a shriek of alarm, he unleashed the power of lightning, and was soon wreathed in electricity. Moments later, he donned a new robe, only to find that it was already melting. What's going on? Whoever's in that Immortals cave, get out here. That inner sect disciple was none other than Lu Tinlei. When other people noticed the source of the problem, they began to roar in rage. Damn it, it's coming from there. I knew something was off. Nobody was living in that Immortals cave before, but for the past few months I've seen black smoke coming out of it. That black smoke is what's causing this disaster. It's been rising up into the air for months now. It's affected the climate, that's why this acid rain is falling. As people cried out in rage, Big Fatty Zhang was holed up in his residence, staring out blankly at what was happening outside. His mind was spinning as he looked at the falling rain, and suddenly, he understood how the disciples back on Fragrant Cloud Peak had felt. At the top of the mountain, the peak lord of Violet Cauldron Peak, Xu Meixiang, was looking around in stupefaction. Not daring to set foot outside her mansion, she waved her finger toward the sky, activating Violet Cauldron Peak's spell formation. A shield of light appeared, which temporarily stopped the rain from falling onto the mountain. However, the shield was visibly being eaten away by the destructive rain. The disciples of Violet Cauldron Peak took advantage of the brief respite to put on new clothing. Incensed, and bursting with killing intent, they rushed in the direction of Bai Xiaochun's Immortals cave. Soon, the disciples on Fragrant Cloud Peak noticed that the Violet Cauldron Peak spell formation shield had been activated, and noticed that rain was falling over it. What's happening over on Violet Cauldron Peak? Even as they pondered the situation, the voices of countless individuals joined together to cause a heaven-shaking, earth-shattering roar of rage to rise up from the direction of Violet Cauldron Peak. Bai Xiaochun. The sound echoed out in all directions, shaking even Violet Cauldron Peak itself. The disciples from Fragrant Cloud Peak looked around, shaken. Then, the image of a certain individual appeared in their minds, and they understood everything. Bai Xiaochun went to Violet Cauldron Peak to concoct medicine. That's definitely the reason. The Peak Lord said he couldn't concoct medicine here, so he went to Violet Cauldron Peak. The roaring of the Violet Cauldron Peak disciples caused Bai Xiaochun to scream in terror. He had just been about to excitedly start another batch when he heard the sound of countless magical techniques battering the Immortals cave. Gaping in shock, he looked out to see a mob of enraged disciples surrounding the cave. Lu Tinlei was there, electricity dancing around him as he charged forward. Wings popped out of the terrified Bai Xiaochun's back, and he took to flight. Enraged shouts echoed out behind him as the Violet Cauldron Peak disciples gave chase. Big Fatty Zhang watched from a distance, swallowing hard and quickly pretending as if he hadn't seen anything. Under no circumstances did he wish anyone to know that he was the one who had arranged for Bai Xiaochun to get an Immortals cave. Even as the Violet Cauldron Peak disciples began to chase Bai Xiaochun down, all of a sudden, cries of alarm rang up from the direction of Green Crest Peak. Something had happened which not a single person had been aware of. Partially due to monsoon winds, only some of the black smoke had made it into the clouds above Violet Cauldron Peak. The rest had been carried by the wind to Green Crest Peak. If it had only been a tiny bit, it would eventually have just faded away without doing anything. But considering the daily buildup, it was no surprise that when rain began to fall on Violet Cauldron Peak, the effects eventually spread to Green Crest Peak. Originally, the disciples from Green Crest Peak had simply watched the events playing out on Fragrant Cloud Peak and Violet Cauldron Peak, shocked, but at the same time, gloating in the misfortune of the other disciples. Furthermore, they had all taken steps to prevent Bai Xiaochun from ever coming to Green Crest Peak. Third Fatty Hay's friends had even warned her against taking him in. But then, the raindrops began to fall. Shocked expressions appeared as people looked up to find that the sky above Green Crest Peak was filled with black clouds. Although they weren't as dense as those above Violet Cauldron Peak, once the acid rain began to fall, and the disciples' clothes began to melt, cries of alarm rose up. As the screams intensified, numerous beams of sword light shot out from Green Crest Peak toward Violet Cauldron Peak, joining the group of disciples from there who were chasing down Bai Xiaochun. Bai Xiaochun. Damn it, don't tell me that Bai Xiaochun secretly came to Green Crest Peak too. He must have. That vile fiend. He definitely snuck over here to concoct medicine. The Green Crest Peak disciples were going mad. Quite a few were already on the verge of losing all of their clothing. Putting on new clothing didn't do any good. Green Crest Peak devolved into enraged chaos, and the disciples quickly became allies with the Violet Cauldron Peak disciples in their desire to catch Bai Xiaochun. Shangguan Tianyu was among them. Although his robes were still in one piece, his murderous rage burned hot. At long last, he had found an opportunity to pay Bai Xiaochun back for the events in the Wildweed Mountains. Rumbling sounds filled the air, along with Bai Xiaochun's screams. It was bad enough that the disciples of Violet Cauldron Peak were chasing him down, but then Green Crest Peak joined in. Then he heard what the Green Crest Peak disciples were saying, and he felt more deeply maligned than ever. I never went to Green Crest Peak. Really? All of the more than 10,000 disciples from Green Crest Peak were in motion now, speeding along on their flying swords. When they heard Bai Xiaochun's explanation, though, they only became angrier. Liar. As the sword light bore down on Bai Xiaochun, the Violet Cauldron Peak disciples unleashed countless magical techniques. Bai Xiaochun was so scared he was screaming at the top of his lungs. I've shed my own blood for the sect. Boom. The attacks of the Violet Cauldron Peak disciples were driving Bai Xiaochun to near madness. I'm a prestige disciple. Boom. As the countless beams of sword light closed in, Bai Xiaochun fluttered the wings on his back, and sweat poured down his face. I'm the junior brother of the sect leader. Even if you were the son of the sect leader, we'd still beat the daylights out of you. The disciples of two mountain peaks joined together in their anger as they chased after Bai Xiaochun with deadly intent. You people are so unreasonable. They're trying to kill me. They're gonna kill me. Bai Xiaochun's scalp was entirely numb. He had done nothing more than concoct some pills, and these people had gone completely mad. Looking like he was about to cry, he pushed forward with as much speed as possible as he shot toward Fragrant Cloud Peak. Now, he suddenly felt as if the disciples from there were a lot more easygoing. After all, Fragrant Cloud Peak was his home. A huge mob was chasing him back toward Fragrant Cloud Peak. He looked like a mouse whose tail had been stepped on as he shot up the mountain, the other disciples in hot pursuit. Just as the disciples from the other mountains were about to step foot on Fragrant Cloud Peak, an enraged, thunderous snort echoed out from the summit of the mountain. Turn your asses around this instant. The voice sounded like the boom of thunder. All of the disciples preparing to charge up Fragrant Cloud Peak coughed up mouthfuls of blood and tumbled backward. A massive power roiled out, pushing all of them away. When the shock left their faces, they exchanged glances and quickly realized how impulsive they had been. Bowing their heads, they clasped hands in apology and retreated. The commotion quickly died down. As soon as Bai Xiaochun saw what had just happened, he was deeply moved. He almost felt like a young child who had been fighting and losing, only to have a parent step in to the rescue and wallop the opponent. Yeah, that's right, he shouted, gesticulating wildly. Turn your asses around. Especially you people from Green Crest Peak, he was just about to explain how he really hadn't concocted any medicine on Green Crest Peak when all of a sudden, pressure weighed down on him as Li Qinghao materialized up ahead. Face grim, he waved his sleeve, causing Bai Xiaochun to fly through the air toward him. A moment later, he had Bai Xiaochun by the neck. Uncle Li, I really didn't go to Green Crest IEE. It didn't matter how fast he blurted the words, he couldn't finish speaking before Li Qinghao flew up into the air. The countless disciples from the other two mountain peaks watched in utter joy as the scene played out. As for the Fragrant Cloud Peak disciples, they looked on with odd expressions before letting out long sighs. Bai Xiaochun really got unlucky this time. He pissed off the Peak Lord. He's really in for it now. He didn't just piss off the Peak Lord, he drove the entire South Bank crazy. As countless disciples looked on in delight, the blood drained from Bai Xiaochun's face. He had just noticed which direction Li Qinghao was heading. It was none other than 10,000 Snakes Valley. Shrieking, he said, I'm sorry, Uncle Li. It didn't take long for Li Qinghao to take the wailing Bai Xiaochun behind Fragrant Cloud Peak to 10,000 Snakes Valley. As soon as they set foot inside, countless vipers looked up and hissed loudly. It was even possible to see the venom dripping from their fangs. Bai Xiaochun was so scared he started shaking. Most terrifying of all was that Li Qinghao continued toward the cave in the middle of the valley. I just wanted to concoct medicine. I didn't do it on purpose. Uncle Li, you have to listen to me. I was just doing what you told me. I didn't concoct medicine on Fragrant Cloud Peak. All his frantic explanation did, however, was cause Li Qinghao's expression to grow even darker. He even sped up as he headed deep into the cave. At first, everything was black, but soon, one pair of cold eyes after another snapped open to stare icily at Bai Xiaochun and Li Qinghao. Because Bai Xiaochun's cultivation base had advanced so much, he was able to see their auras much more clearly now. He was petrified to find that this place was far, far more terrifying than he had previously imagined. That was even more the case now that he had mastered all 5 volumes of spirit creatures. Even though they were surrounded by darkness, when he circulated his spiritual power, he quickly identified many of the snakes and recalled the information about them. A 3 steps viper. A morning eye anaconda. That's a gold-silver vermin snake. To his shock, Bai Xiaochun found that all of the snakes were venomous, and according to the 5 volumes of spirit creatures, they were incredibly powerful. In fact, even Foundation establishment cultivators who didn't deal with them quickly enough would be killed. After enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, Li Qinghao had dragged Bai Xiaochun to the depths of the cave, into a huge subterranean cavern filled with countless hissing snakes. There were even 9 that exuded the power of a cultivation base equivalent to the 8th level of qi condensation. Their eyes were bright red, and their fangs constantly dripped with shocking venom. A certain distance into the cavern was a stone hut surrounded by a spell formation that kept everything within 30 meters clear of snakes. That was where the snakes piled up en masse. Despite their distance from the hut itself, Bai Xiaochun still felt an intense sensation of deadly crisis. A thump could be heard as Li Qinghao waved his sleeve, sending Bai Xiaochun tumbling down next to the stone hut. Want to concoct medicine? Do it here. There's earth flame and a pill furnace. And take this. At least here you won't disturb any of the other disciples. Snorting coldly, Li Qinghao tossed a bag of holding over to Bai Xiaochun. You'll find plenty of medicinal plants and food in there. Stay here and stay out of trouble. After you've had some time to think, I'll come take you out. With a final glare at Bai Xiaochun, he did a final check to make sure the spell formation was working, then flew away. Having no other choice, he had finally resorted to using this place to try to grind away some of Bai Xiaochun's mischievousness. Of course, deep down, he truly cared for him, and was careful to make sure the spell formation was in good order. Based on his understanding of Bai Xiaochun, he was certain that he wouldn't step out of the spell formation. Bai Xiaochun appeared to be on the verge of tears as he watched Li Qinghao leave. Moments later, without the pressure from Li Qinghao to suppress them, the snakes started to slither about here and there. They bared their fangs, and even tried to break through the spell formation shield, sending venom splattering about in all directions. Further off in the distance were some snakes in the 8th level of qi condensation who eyed Bai Xiaochun coldly, almost as if they wished to swallow him up. Bai Xiaochun began to pant. Those are blood god cobras. I can't believe they're in the 8th level of qi condensation. One drop of their venom could kill 10,000 people. Heart-pounding with fear, he looked around a bit more, and realized that there were 3 snakes who were comparable to the 9th level of qi condensation, and there were even 2 in the Great Circle. The fluctuations that emanated from them were not the same as those from cultivators. These were deadly venomous snakes. Most heart-pounding of all was that there was one set of fluctuations that seemed even more powerful than the rest. And all of them seemed to be staring at him. Soon, the sky outside grew dark, and Bai Xiaochun sat there, sighing miserably. What do I do now? Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.